My name is Zhaoyuan Li, and my presentation is about Kenya's climate change. This is the outline of my presentation. First, I will introduce some background information about Kenya, and then I will introduce the vulnerabilities and the opportunities of climate change, and then I'll introduce the history of fossil fuel burning and the deforestation in Kenya. After that, I'll introduce the dominant lifestyles for different group of people in Kenya and introduce the UNFCCC and Kyoto. And then I'll introduce the political platform of Kenya and Kenya's vulnerable population and some recommendations I made for Kenya. Finally, I'll make a conclusion of my presentation. Kenya, officially the Republic of Kenya, is a country in Africa. Kenya obtained independence in December 1963. The economy of Kenya is the largest by GDP in Southeast and Central Africa. Agriculture and service industry are the major economic drivers. Although Kenya is the most industrially developed country in African Great Lakes region, manufacturing still counts for only 14% of GDP. Kenya's climate varies from tropical along the coast to temperature inland to arid in the north and northeast parts of country. I'll introduce the vulnerabilities and the opportunities from five different dimensions: ecological, economical, social, political, and cultural. The first is ecological. 1.6 million are affected by drought in Kenya. 1 million people in northern Kenya, Turkana region need food aid. Drought hinder food production, reduce the number of agricultural exports, threaten residents' health, and cause people die. Next is economical. Economic is affected by climate change. Agriculture is the backbone of Kenya's economy, and agricultural products depending on climate conditions. The amount of agricultural products decrease because of drought and land degradation. Due to climate change, Kenya's GDP experiences inconsistency and revenue is affected by climate change. The social reason is women are limited to owning, acquiring, and control properties throughout Kenya. In Kenya, 80% jobs and 60% income are related with agriculture. Women in Kenya do vast majority of agricultural work but only earn fraction of the income generated and own a nominal percentage of assets. 40% household run solely by women. Because of lack of fair income, nearly all of these homes suffer from poverty. Climate change will cause drought. Drought will reduce agricultural production. That will reduce women's income, increase the poverty. The political reason is Kenya begins construction on a massive border wall. The reason for Kenya building a border wall is because numbers of killers crossed the border from Somalia killed hundreds of Kenyan residents. The border wall are now cheap. It will cost 2 million per kilometer. The border is 670 kilometers long. The government spent this huge amount of money on border wall. They will not have enough money to deal with the climate change. The cultural reason is Kenya and Uganda pastoral conflict. For the border area, the conflict usually arises because of the competition of scarce resources. The main reason of the conflict is resources. The climate change in Kenya will reduce the available resources, and that might cause more conflict in border area. So these are the five vulnerabilities to climate change. And next, I will introduce five opportunities Kenya will have of climate change. For the opportunities, I'll first introduce from ecological aspect. Kenya transformed 40,000 acres of land into wind farm. The project will produce 20% of country's current installed electricity generating capacity when it comes online in 2016. Instead of use fossil fuel, Kenya start to use renewable energy. It will help mitigating climate change. And then from economical aspect, the Kenyan government has made progresses toward preparing the country to deal with climate change, including accessing international climate finance or adaptation mitigation actions. Climate change bill and policy are yet to be finalized and approved by Parliament. The Public Finance Management Act of 2012. Kenya government developed the National Climate Change Response Strategy, also known as NCCRS, in 2010, and the National Climate Change Action Plan, also known as NCCAP, in 2013. By using the fund, Kenya can have a better preparation of the climate change. The social reason of the opportunities Kenya have of climate change is the tourism of Kenya came out of crisis. In 2008, Kenya's tourism faced challenges caused by political instability. In 2013, due to the faith the opposition had in judiciary's competence and the political impartiality, the Kenyan's social is stable. The increase of tourism will help Kenya's economy. That will give Kenya more financial resources to mitigate the climate change. The political reason is Kenya works on policy to guide new farming law. The new policy expected to address gaps in laws touching on agriculture, which is developed function. The new policy will guide the farming law, give farmers more freedom about agriculture. The last one is from cultural aspect. Kenya has at least 40 different ethnic African groups, has three major languages. Across Kenya as a whole, two-thirds of people are Christian, with centuries of influence of Arabic and Islamic traders and settlers, particularly along the coast. Around 50% Kenyans are Muslim. Kenyan people have different faiths, speak different languages. That will make Kenyan people easier to understand the other countries' people's thought, and it will be easier to work with them deal with the climate change. After introduced the opportunities and the vulnerabilities Kenya have of climate change, I will introduce some history of Kenya's fossil fuel burning, deforestation, and the relationship between climate change and fossil fuel burning. The history of fossil fuel burning in Kenya. Petroleum exploration in Kenya began in the 1950s, with the first well being drilled in 1960s. In the 1986, the petroleum exploration and production legislation in Kenya was revised to provide suitable incentives and flexibility to attract international exploration interests in the country. Total petroleum consumption in Kenya has grown from 2.6 million cubic meters in 2003 to 3.73 million cubic meters in 2006. The relationship with climate change. The burning of fossil fuels in the largest resources of emissions of carbon dioxide, which is one of the greenhouse gas contributes to global warming. As you can see from the chart in the right corner, the consumption of petroleum and gas continue increase over time. Current emission in Kenya. According to its 2002 initial national communication to the UNFCCC, Kenya is a net CO2 sink, absorbing about 22,351 gigagrams of carbon dioxide per year, mainly due to the regeneration of forests and non-forest trees. Carbon dioxide in Kenya were reported at 0.3 in 2008. The average American is responsible for 19.8 tons per person. Chinese citizens clocks in at 4.6 tons per person. In 2007, China became the leader in total emissions. After introduce the fossil fuel burning history in Kenya, I'll introduce the history of deforestation in Kenya. In 1963, forests covered 10% of land in Kenya, and by 2006, that dropped to 1.7%. In 2009, in Kenya's Rift Valley, 400,000 hectares of forest was destroyed. Between 2004 and 2006, more than 100,000 people were forcibly evicted from their homes in forest area in Kenya. Forests play a huge role in carbon cycle in our planet. When forests are cut down, not only does carbon absorption cease, but also carbon stored in trees is released into atmosphere as carbon dioxide. If the wood is burned or even if it's left to rot after deforestation process, that will cause global warming. The deforestation will cause temperature rise. The effects of microclimate changes caused by deforestation in Kenya highlights the mean indoor temperature of houses located in deforested area were 1.2 Celsius higher than the house located in forest area during the dry season and 0.7 Celsius higher during the rainy season. The average carbon footprint in Kenya is 0.31 in 2009. After introducing the history of Kenya, I'll introduce the dominant lifestyles for different group of people in Kenya. I'll introduce this topic from three dimensions: the riches, the middle class, and the poor. First, I'll introduce from the riches. The rich people in Kenya spend lots of money on designers' clothes, wines, and cars. The rich people in Kenya send their children to Europe for school, and they fly out of country to islands for vacation. The rich people's income do not come from agriculture. They can endure climate change much easier, so it is much easier for them to adapt to climate change. The middle classes. Most of the middle classes work in informal sector where they are highly vulnerable to economic shocks. The World Bank estimates less than 2% of Kenyans belong to global middle class, spend $10 to $1,780 per day. Middle classes are vulnerable to economic shocks. Agriculture is the backbone of Kenya's economy, so the middle classes are vulnerable to climate change. It will be not so easy for them to adapt climate change. The poor. Kenya's poverty is concentrated in the rural area. About 79% population participating in farming, and they are considered as poor people. The food shortage and the growing population makes them extremely vulnerable to climate change, and also there are some diseases like AIDS affect their life. I mentioned the UNFCCC in previous slides, and now I will introduce what is the UNFCCC and what is the Kyoto Protocol. The full name of the UNFCCC is the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. UNFCCC is an international environmental treaty, also known as multilateral environmental agreement, that was opened for signature at Earth Summit held in Rio de Janeiro in 1992 and came into force in 1996. Kenya ratified the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change on 30th August 1994, thereby signifying her determination to join the international community in combating the problem of climate change. And for the Kyoto Protocol, the Kyoto Protocol is an international treaty which extends the 1992 United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change that commits state parties to reduce greenhouse gas emissions based on premise that global warming exists and man-made carbon dioxide emissions have caused it. The protocol is based on the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities. It puts the obligation to reduce current emissions on developed countries on the basis that they are historically responsible for the current level of greenhouse gas in the atmosphere. Kenya's political platform. Kenya hosted the second meeting of parties to the Kyoto Protocol in conjunction with the 12th session of the Conference of Parties to the Climate Change Convention in Nairobi from 6 to 17 November 2006. Kenya has been ahead of many other countries in developing nation climate change strategy, and agriculture is one of the key critical sectors of interest. The National Climate Change Response Strategy dates from 2010, and the National Climate Change Action Plan was launched in March this year, stressing low carbon development and resilience in the face of climate change. Development of geothermal power and increasing the country's tree cover and other forest resources, including agroforestry practices and the improved natural resources management system, are some of mechanisms already embraced. Biofuels are another area for debate, both over the appropriateness of land use and the acquisitions of land grabbing and the risks for farmers of switching to these monocrops, thus exposing themselves to price fluctuation in international markets. Effort is also being made to implement reducing emissions throughout avoiding deforestation and degradation projects, which resonate with a narrative which places a significant responsibility for environmental degradation of African agricultural practices. There are two major narratives straddle the debate in Kenya. The first one is climate change as a threat to food security. The second one is climate change as an opportunity to address energy and forest degradation problems. The challenge for Kenya is to develop strategies which would promote sustainable development without compromising in increased emission of greenhouse gas. Agriculture is the backbone of Kenya's economy. It also causes lots of trouble such as deforestation and land degradation. The RED Plus project will help Kenya to solve this problem. The next thing I want to talk about is vulnerable population in Kenya. There are mainly five categories of vulnerable population in Kenya: the poor, women, indigenous people, farmers, and children. The poor are vulnerable to climate changes because they do not have money for food, water, and the education for their children. They are facing food shortage, limited resources, and disease. Women has been subjugated to consist right bills while shouldering an overwhelming amount of responsibilities. Women in Kenya do the vast majority of agricultural work and produce the majority of food, yet they earn only a fraction of the income generated and own a nominal percentage of assets because of the lack of fair income. They are suffering from poverty and make them vulnerable to climate change. Indigenous peoples. In Kenya, the people who are identified as indigenous peoples are mainly pastoralists and hunter-gatherers, as well as some fisher peoples and small farming communities. Climate change causes deforestation and land degradation that cause less food for livestock, and that will affect their income. Farmers. Climate change caused drought. In 2014, 1.6 million people was affected by the drought. Drought also affect agriculture. Drought reduce the agriculture production, reduce their income, and will trigger famine. Children. United Nations Development Program did a project and said There will be less predictable weather patterns over the coming decades in Kenya. In Kenya, the population growing very fast. There are limited resources and a lack of education for children. Children need support, skills, and the infrastructure to ensure they can survive and thrive in the face of this uncertainty. And here are some recommendations I made for Kenya. Develop and use renewable energy. Grow crops and use surplus crops produce biofuel. Transport water to northern Kenya, solve the drought. Spend more money on infrastructures, finish the border war, build more public schools, free education, educate people about disease like HIV, plant more trees, slow the deforestation, and finally solve the gender equity problem. Reasons for the recommendations. The Turkana region in northern Kenya is facing one of the worst droughts in living memory, with more than 1 million people in need of food aid. The food shortage is caused by the drought. Kenya has the fourth largest HIV epidemic in the world. In 2012, an estimated 1.6 million people were living with HIV. Roughly 57,000 people died from AIDS-related illness. Moreover, there are now 1.1 million orphans to the epidemic. It is very important to educate people about the disease and teach them how to prevent it. Next, I'll introduce how the vulnerable populations will be affected by my recommendations. Kenya's vulnerable population are mainly women, children, farmers, the poor, and the indigenous peoples. For the farmers, agriculture is the backbone of Kenya's economy. Without water, agriculture will not succeed. Transport water to northern Kenya will give people more resources and they will have more opportunities to grow crops, solve the famine, and earn more income. Also, they can use the surplus crops to produce biofuel and use biofuels for their harvesting machine. Build more schools and free education will be very helpful for children. They can learn about disease and how to prevent it. They also can have a better understanding about the climate change. Currently, women in Kenya do the vast majority of agricultural work and produce the majority of food, yet they earn only a fraction of income generated and own a nominal percentage of assets. Solve the gender equality problem will give them a chance to earn the income they deserve. Indigenous peoples. Plant more trees can not only solve the deforestation, but also can provide more food for indigenous people's livestock. The poor are vulnerable to climate change because they do not have enough money and resources. Build more infrastructures will give them more living supplies and secure their basic needs. Equities and recommendations. In accounting and finance, equity is the difference between the value of asset and the cost of liabilities of something owned. In this case, equity is the difference between the costs and the benefits of my recommendations. I think the choice Kenya needs to make is between money and the future of the Kenyans. Kenya spend money on new technology and the infrastructure will make Kenya people's life easier under climate change and provide a better life for future generations. Conclusion. Kenya, like the rest of the world, is experiencing climate change and variabilities and the associated adverse impacts. Kenya has high vulnerable population to climate change due to limited resources, but Kenya's government is working on the solutions to climate change. I think the effective policies and people support Kenya can adapt to climate change, lower their carbon emissions, and mitigate the effect of climate change. And here are the citations for my presentation. Thank you for watching this video.